even that. Get to yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Spiritual Fitness with your host, Vaisheshika Prabhu, veteran Bhakti Yogi, author and former monk, and myself, JM. Spiritual Fitness is a program dedicated to exploring the timeless texts and practices of Bhakti Yoga for people who want wisdom in their everyday life. We have close to 25 members on Zoom and more than 50 members on Facebook. Good afternoon, Vaisheshika Prabhu. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, JM. I'm glad to be here and good to see everybody. Hey, Josh. Thanks for coming. Great to have all of you. Thank you. Thank you. And today, speaking of timeless wisdom, I'll be reading from a few of the wisdom texts because, as we've heard in previous sessions, one of the practices of Bhakti Yoga or Kriya Yoga is to hear. It's called Shravanam. And when we hear from these ancient wisdom texts, it helps to overcome any of the anomalies that develop within the mind. And we'll be talking about the mind a little bit today, as we have in previous sessions as well, from a point of view of Sankhya, which is looking at all the elements in the world and finding out where we stand amidst all of them. And before I start, I offer my respects to my spiritual teacher and to all of you who are on the spiritual journey and following the path. Namaste. And I'd like to start this morning with a little mantra meditation. And mantra meditation is recommended in the various ancient scriptures like the Yoga Sutras, which is a treatise on yoga psychology. And it gives a very detailed understanding of how the mind works, how we interact with the mind and the intelligence. And there's a strong recommendation there for using mantra in order to separate ourselves from the vision that I am this body, which is called ahankara, which is an interesting word in Sanskrit. Ahang means I, and kara means to act. And really, literally, it means I am doing this or that. There's an example. A little boy sees a barbell and wants to lift it and goes over and puts his hands on the barbell, and then the father standing behind him actually lifts the weight. And the little boy thinks, oh, I just lifted 500 pounds. And in a similar way, although I'm within this body, I'm a conscious entity, and I'm desiring and moving about, actually my activities are being facilitated by a higher power. However, in ahankara, which sometimes is translated as false ego or a false sense of who I am and what I'm doing, then I'm saying I'm the doer, but actually I'm instrumental, but the actual physical activity and mental activity is being carried out by nature around me, which is controlled from a higher sense by our original conscious source. And so ahankar also means I am my car. So it's a way of mispronouncing the Sanskrit language and getting some metaphor out of it. But you say aham, I, car, I am my car. So how many people have ever identified with a car? It's like, oh, I'm a Volvo person. Or people get stereotyped as like, oh, he drives a station wagon. It must mean something. Or for that matter, a Porsche or something else. And the idea of a ahankar is our body is a car. And when I'm driving it around, I might think I am this car.
We can boost.
But actually, the wise person in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavi Hastini Shuni Chaiva Shrapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. So Pandit is a person who sees the difference between him or herself and the car and the body, and also that others are different from their bodies as well. So in the verse I just quoted in Sanskrit from the Bhagavad Gita, it says that a person who's come to knowledge is one who sees a dog, an elephant, a priest, an ordinary person, names a spectrum of different entities, trees, whatever, walking, standing, who are conscious living entities. But that person, although he or she interacts with them appropriately in a practical way in the world, actually sees that beyond this particular body, there is a commonality, there's a spiritual being within each body. That's what animates it. Consciousness is obvious and apparent by its symptoms, which are life. Life animates matter, and not the other way around. There's not a combination of matter that creates life, according to the Vedic wisdom. Therefore, an intelligent person, a pundit, a learned person, is not someone who knows what the poles are any given day, but is, according to Vedic wisdom, somebody who sees spiritually, has trenchant vision, sees beyond just the body. So how does one develop that? Through bhakti yoga. And in the practice of bhakti, we have mantra meditation. So man means mind and tra means to deliver. The mind is the source of all our suffering. And it is also the reservoir of all kinds of ideas and imagery. We've gone through that in previous sessions, talking about the combinations, permutations of thoughts that can conjure various kinds of ideas and scenarios. And when one becomes absorbed in the mind, then the mind becomes the ruler and actually is oppressive. So speaking of sound vibration, some very interesting echoes going on here today. So let's start today with a little mantra meditation. And as usual, let's close our eyes and sit up a little straighter than you were a second ago. This is something that you can start your day with. If you wake up early before the sun, if possible, and then take some time, purify yourself, touch water, take a bath if you can, whatever's best. The main thing is to take advantage of the time early in the morning. And then find a comfortable place to sit where you won't be disturbed. I recommend getting a do not disturb sign if you live around others, and let them know that this is the time I'm going to retreat inwardly, and then put up your sign on your door or hang it around your ear, whatever you have to do. So now we're sitting up straight, eyes closed, and take some nice natural breaths and relax, but remain alert. And as you do, you have the luxury of focusing your attention for now, just for now, on your breath. And don't entertain. Means when you entertain, you open the door, you offer a drink of water and a place to sit, the thoughts that come to your door, knock, 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 and you say, not right now. Just for now, I'm going to be aware of my existence. So breathe and notice your breath. And as you inhale, mentally say in. And as you exhale, mentally say out. And follow your breath. Keep your awareness fixed on the breath and remain alert but relaxed. And the first mantra we're going to try today is Om. It's a one-syllable seed mantra that synchronizes all of the spiritual energies within our chakras. So I'll say the mantra, and then behind closed mics, you can say it along with me. And take an inhalation, and then we'll say the mantra Om. Now continue to breathe. And we'll say the next mantra Nitai Gauranga. And you can follow with me. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. And finally, the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And now, take some time just to feel the vibration and notice how by vibrating the mantra, you've introduced a higher energy into your mind, into your body. And bring your attention back to your breath. And you can rub your palms together to create some friction and slowly open your eyes, come back into the room. And for a minute, I'm going to talk about a few of the ways in which the ancient wisdom literatures describe the ways in which to separate oneself from the materialistic mind and fix the mind on the spiritual topics and subject matter. So, first of all, let's see the slide that describes, just show me the first slide. So one of the objectives of yoga is to realize the ground of all being. Where is it that we can actually stand and not be moved? Everything about this world that we're in is changing. And for an entity that is non-changing, and that's the description of the conscious being that is ourselves, around us, the world is constantly changing and shifting, and it's disconcerting. When it moves extremely fast, we call it a disaster. But it's always moving, it's always changing, it's always morphing. In a dream, we're constantly observing changing scenery around us. When we're awake, the world's always changing, maybe a little bit slower than in the dream. But we remain steady and constant. And how do we become situated in that ground place? And in Sanskrit, it's called shta, which is cognate with English, stand. Where can we stand where we won't get moved by the changing world around us? So in the practice called Sankhya. There's an analyzation of the categories of existence. Sankhya. So san means complete and kya means to count. So Sankhya means a complete analysis of all aspects of the world. What are we actually dealing with here? How do the different parts fit together? There are volumes written about Sankhya. Those who have minds that are adept to physics, very much like Sankhya, because physics really is a kind of Sankhya. It's a way of counting elements, dividing everything up into categories and seeing what do we have here. But there's a step that is oftentimes missing, and that is how to find antimatter, that which is not material. And that's included in theistic Sankhya or yoga. So when we come to that stage, that's called jnana or knowledge. Actually, the words are cognate again. Jnana and knowledge are, jnana is in Sanskrit, knowledge is in English. They're cognate. So full awareness of the categories of existence. And here are two main categories. Atma, the non-material self. When we talk about, in English, we say spiritual. In Sanskrit, it's called chit. Chit means that which actually exists. It doesn't change. And vastu means a substance. So the chid vastu is the non-material entity called the Atma. That's you. You're not your body. You're not your mind either. However, you do exist, and you always have existed, and you always will exist according to the Vedic Sankhya. And on the other hand, there's Prakriti, which is the material elements that are all around us. And knowledge means knowing the difference between these two. There's a difference between you and your body and the whole world. And being able to see that difference, first of all, philosophically, understanding it, and then observing it for yourself through the practice of bhakti yoga, you can begin to actually see yourself as the non-temporal, non-chemical, non-neural entity that's animating the body. You can observe your own awareness and your own consciousness, your own conscious self, because that's what we do as conscious beings. We become aware, and the awareness can become aware of itself. Now I'm externally focused, and I'm seeing the movements of the world, and I'm identifying with them. And I'm thinking, this is me. That's what's called, and this is a quick quiz, what's it called when I look at my body and I say, I am my body? Because can anybody remember the Sanskrit word?
Ahankara.
Who said that? Who said ahankara?
I did. Srivatsan.
Oh, Srivasa, thank you very much. Very good. Yeah, ahankara. I'm not my car, or I am my car. Ahankara means I am my car, but someone might come along and say, no, you're not your car. You're just driving a particular car right now. So same thing, I'm just driving my body. Now, before we switch back to the slides, which tends to be a little bit of an oppressive kind of a view because we're just stuck on one slide and have to be absorbed in it. It's nicer here when we can see each other a little more. As I promised, I'm going to read to you directly from some of the wisdom literatures. And this is one of the ways to develop what I'll be describing in a few more slides is called Vivek. Vivek. You might know somebody named Vivek if you live in Silicon Valley. It's a popular name, but it actually means discrimination. The discriminatory power, it's known as a power or a Shakti to be able to discriminate between yourself and the external energy. So I'm reading now directly from the text of the Bhagavad Gita, which is thousands of years old. It comes from Sanskrit, but I'm just going to read the English parts. And in this chapter, there's Sankhya wisdom being imparted. And this is how Sankhya works. It compartmentalizes the various elements of the world. This is in chapter 13, the 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses and the mind, the 5 sense objects: desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms and convictions. All these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. So this is kind of a summary of what Sankhya is about. Although, as I said, there are volumes and volumes written in which the elements of the world are broken down into their various origins and evolutes. That means one thing arises from the next. There's a sort of transformation or evolution of one substance into many varieties. Very much like if anybody's ever made yogurt before from milk, you can make yogurt. From that, you can also make butter. From butter, you can make ghee. And they all have different properties. The yogurt cools the body. Milk heats the body, according to the Ayurvedic wisdom and system. They all have different properties and effects, but it's the same substance. It's just been transformed in various ways. So the whole world is a transformation of one substance, but it becomes divided into various categories. This is very much in parallel with much of the modern thinking in physics as well. There's many, many parallels between ancient Vedic wisdom and modern physics. And that is that when you look at solids in the world, you're actually looking at various combinations of subtle matter. So then in the next verse, there's a description of knowledge and how one develops knowledge. So this is an interesting take on discovery. We have the scientific method, which means to use empiric observation or empiric knowledge which is gained through observation. That's the meaning of empiric. And then through testing a theory, getting consistent results with double-blind studies and so forth, and being able to replicate. So there's a scientific method. However, there's another method for getting knowledge, and that has to do with one's attitude and one's approach to life in general, one's lifestyle and one's worldview and mindset. And here are some descriptions of the elements of knowledge, 20 elements of being able to discern knowledge, which again means to know the difference between yourself and everything that's not yourself, which is called the field and the knower of the field. Just before I read the verse, creating some suspense, I guess. An example often given is a child playing in a yard. And in the yard, there's a fence. Around the yard, rather, there's a fence. And the child can play with all kinds of toys within the confines of the yard. And of course, whatever toys are provided, that's what's there available within that particular space. And of course, if you go from one house to the next, you'll find some of the fields are bigger, some of them are smaller. Some of the fences are more confining. Some of them have more toys than others, but they're all a confinement of the child playing within that particular yard. So every Atma, or living conscious being, has a particular field according to previous karma. We're given a particular space to play in with a certain number of toys that we get along with our birth in this world. And we stay in this field for some time, and then we transfer to another field based on our activities and our consciousness when we leave it. So those who are on the path of self-realization, our discovering the difference between my field and myself, or known as kshetra. Kshetra means field, and kshetragya, which means the knower of the field. Now, here are the 20 items which are mentioned here in this ancient text that describe the path for knowing oneself and knowing oneself to be different from the field. Humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the ill effects of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to the original conscious source of everything, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be, is ignorance. So this is the approach of yoga or Vedic study to prepare oneself to be receptive to knowledge, which naturally comes into the mind of one who's amended the mind to accept wisdom. Interesting that it starts with humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, and so forth. That may not be the first things that are taught in a science class, generally, or a physics class, in order to discover knowledge and so forth. And now we'll take, let's just see if there's any questions on anything that we've talked about so far, or any reflections from the meditation that we did to start off. And if there's not JM, then I can go into some of the next slides. And anybody who wants to put anything up on the chat, feel free. And if you also want to come in live and participate, we'd love to hear your voice. And it's perfectly okay to come in at any time. Just give us a shout out.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself and ask the question or share reflections, or type in the chat box, and we'll read out.
Okay, let's look at a few slides because they may be provocative.
Okay. I think we did receive one question.
Ooh, nice. Vivek, the power of discrimination. So this is extremely important, because without discrimination, especially human beings can entangle themselves by being overcome by the mind. For instance, addictions, bad habits, and so forth arise from associating with people who have them. And then without the power of discrimination, it's very natural for the mind to take the path of least resistance and become weakened, and also to develop all kinds of bad mental habits, which lead to physical habits, which lead to a degraded kind of lifestyle. And V Sanders has put something in the chat box. Can you read that, JM?
Yes, I am reading it. Just a second. How is psychotic episode explained?
Let's come back into the other view. So the mind, which is called the chitta, is part of the material world. There are material elements, as I described before. Everything is an evolution from one subtle substance, and it telescopes out into many varieties. And our minds are actually part of that infrastructure of the material world. And it's a very subtle substance. So when the mind is, or the chitta, is affected by various modalities in this world, then if we're identifying with it, we also feel that we're going through these same changes. For instance, if you've ever seen somebody in a dream who is being chased by a tiger, and that person's eyes are moving rapidly, and internally the sleeper is running, and you may notice that they're a little bit restless, but you don't see them running. Only in their chitta are they running. However, the whole world outside is stable, and there's no tiger chasing them, actually. It's a phantom tiger. And similarly, somebody might take some psychotropic, psychedelic, I'm not sure what the exact term is, but there are mind-altering drugs which make one see the world as moving. There are patterns emerging from the moon, maybe animals coming out of it, or maybe the stove starts to breathe and sing. And the person's sitting there on a chair watching, completely still, but it's all taking place within the chitta. So there are various ways in which the chitta can become affected by the prana within one's body. When that is disturbed, the life airs in the body get out of balance through an external drug experience. The chitta can then be moved in a certain way. And you can think of it like a pond that you're looking at is completely still. If somebody throws a rock into it, then suddenly it begins to move. And then the reflection on that pond also starts to move and fragment in different ways. So there are various ways in which the chitta can become affected. And this is one of the ways in which psychotic episodes are described. What else, JM?
We have CK who's asking, can you help how one attains these 20 things in Bhagavad Gita?
Well, interestingly enough, and you'll find this, that if you read them regularly, you'll start to imbibe them, or you drink them in with your consciousness. And when you hear about them, for instance, did anybody hear any particular elements on that list that struck you? That said, oh, that sounds interesting, or I'd like to do that one. I'd like to be more like this or that. Were any of them on the list, or do you want me to read it again and see if it sticks?
Detachment from large groups of people. Wasn't there something like that?
Yeah, that's one of the tendencies of somebody who's eager for introspection and so forth. Yeah, that one stuck with you? Mm-hmm. So when you hear them, yes, Joshua. Was that you, Joshua, who said that?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Right. So when you hear them regularly, you read the list, you'll notice that they start to either appeal to your mind, or they start to be something that's actionable that you can actually work on. You say, oh yeah, that sounds like a directive for me. I could use that. So this is one of the ways in which we've talked before about one practices bhakti yoga, is you hear from wisdom literatures every day. And then by hearing about it, your mind starts to go for it. As I've said before, where attention goes, energy flows. And anything you read or hear, you expose yourself to, will get your mind going in a particular direction. What else, JM? Anything else there?
Yes. So there is one more question from Srivatsan. Is it correct to assume that the reverse process is also true? All these 20 qualities are a consequence of jnana as well?
Are all of these elements of knowledge a product of jnana?
Yes.
I'm not exactly sure how you mean that, but they are knowledge producing. In other words, they prepare us for taking in knowledge, which is available all the time, because the only restriction is that my chitta becomes covered. And so if there's a mirror and you can't see in it, you don't get proper information of yourself looking in the mirror. And when you uncover the mirror, then it becomes clear who you are and what your situation is. So in a similar way, the process of knowledge, these 20-fold items, help to clear the chitta, expand it, bring it to a luminous state called sattva. And from there, knowledge becomes apparent. It's already there. It's just that it's covered right now. So these illuminate the consciousness. So they're a part of the process of knowledge. They are the process of knowledge. They're elements of knowledge simultaneously. Okay, I better show a few more slides because time is marching on. So as an example, I'm giving you a little more information about the way Sankhya works. And the tan-matras are subtle sense objects. This gets a little technical, so I'm just going to walk through it. If you have any particular thoughts about it, you can ask afterwards or during. But I'm just giving you a sample of Sankhya and the way the world is observed through that process. The gross elements that we experience come from a combination of the tan-matras. What are the tan-matras? They're sound, tactile, or the sense of touch, form, taste, and fragrance. And as I mentioned, there's a way in which they create their evolutes, or they evolve into other grosser forms. Everything evolves from subtle to gross. So from sound, ether is evolved. And from sound plus the sense of touch, air. From sound plus touch plus form, fire. From sound plus touch plus form plus taste, water. Sound, touch, form, taste, and fragrance is earth. And you might notice that earth contains all of these. If you strike something that's earthy, you'll hear a sound. You'll also be able to touch it. It also has form. It also has taste and fragrance. Water, on the other hand, is missing the fragrance. It has sound, touch, form, and taste. Fire has sound, touch, and form. Air has sound and touch, but doesn't have form, and space or ether has sound. So this is an example of a way in which Vedic Sankhya divides up the world and shows causality, how everything's emanating from an original conscious source. Okay. Then, as we've mentioned before, Prakriti, or material nature, that which is different from our Atma, is affected by three modalities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And so in sattva, there's clarity, stability, orderliness. In rajas, activity. It's very unstable, unclear. And from rajas, we can either upgrade ourselves to sattva, or the default mode, if we don't do anything, is that we descend into tamas generally, which is chaos, darkness, and inertia. I don't know about any of you, but if you've ever had any dark days where you just couldn't get off the mat, or you just felt down and angry or sleepy and unproductive, this is the product of tamas. And it's easy to slip into tamas. You just hang around long enough, it'll happen. So dealing with this is the practice of yoga. Let's see the next slide. On the scale of stability, we have these 5 states of consciousness. Mutta means dull, which is affected by tamas. Shipa means wandering. The mind is affected by tamas and rajas. Vishepa means distracted. That's rajas. Ekagra means one-pointed. And you can see rajas, sattva, and nirodha means completely restrained. And that's in sattva. So these 5 states, Patanjali mentions, out of these 5, only ekagra and nirodha are yoga, or states in which we can make progress in life. The rest of the 3, when we're distracted, wandering, dull, affected by the lower modes of material nature, we're unproductive. So yoga stabilizes the mind. Your subtle body, or chitta, is volatile. As we saw in that scale, it can move from rajas into tamas. And yoga is the process of bringing the chitta to stability. So it's actually a way of life and a practice through which you can still the mind, the churnings of the mind, and come to a place of stability within your mind. And now here's some practical points. Overcoming weakness of heart. This is actually a thing. Weakness of heart is called Hridaya Dorbalya in Sanskrit. So Hridaya means the heart, and Dorbalya means that you don't have any strength there. So weakness of heart means, in some case, that you know what the right thing is, but you can't do it. Have you ever been in such a situation? I know what I'm supposed to do, but I just can't do it. That's a product of Dorbalya. And also weakness of heart means I'm attached to something I know I shouldn't be attached to, but I can't give it up. And I can't do anything about it. I'm just curious, has that ever happened to anybody here? You don't have to give details.
Yes.
Unless
Yes.
you want to. CK, yes.
Yes, it happened.
Yes.
It is happening still.
It's relatable.
Yeah.
So weakness of heart, also known as WOH, woe, is one of the deficiencies that can be overcome by the practice of bhakti yoga. So in the overcoming of weakness of heart, we especially have the element of Vivek, or discrimination, of making a clear distinction between that which is permanent and that which is not permanent. And this is one of the most important aspects of yoga, is discriminating between the two. Because, as an example, if somebody offers you $1 million and says that you can keep it for a week, and then I'm going to come and take it back. And when I do, it's going to be violent. Somebody's going to come in and beat you with a shoe and take back all the money. And will you take it? Would you accept the money? Joshua says no. I can't see anybody else. Rajesh says no. So if you consider that anything that's temporary, whatever I grab onto is going to be taken back, then there's kind of in the yogic mindset, I don't become attached to it because it's temporary. This seems to make good stuff of common sense, but it's not so common. That is sense. And here's a literature that's over 5,000 years old, written in Sanskrit, which is poetically talking about the earth observing kings coming into power and then leaving. And you want to hear her observations? She's personified as Bhumi in the form of a goddess, like a cow, who's in the shape of a cow. And then she's observing the conquering kings of the world. So here's a little bit from the perspective of Bhumi as far as what's temporary and what's not. So this is being recited 5,000 years ago by a sage named Shukadev Goswami. He says, seeing the kings of this earth busy trying to conquer her, the earth herself laughed. She said, just see how these kings, who are actually playthings in the hands of death, are desiring to conquer me. Great rulers, even those who are learned, meet frustration and failure because of material desire. Driven by desire, these kings place great hopes and faith in the dead lumps of flesh called the body, even though the material frame is as fleeting as bubbles of foam on water. Kings and politicians imagine, first I will conquer my senses and mind, then I will subdue my chief ministers and rid myself of the thorn pricks of my advisors, citizens, friends, and relatives, as well as the keepers of my elephants. In this way, I will gradually conquer the entire earth. Because the hearts of these leaders are bound by great expectations, they fail to see death waiting nearby. After conquering all the land on my surface, these proud kings forcibly enter the ocean and conquer the sea itself. What is the use of their self-control, which is aimed at political exploitation? The actual goal of self-control is spiritual liberation. She continues, although in the past, great people and their descendants have left me, departing from this world in the same helpless way they came into it, even today, foolish people are trying to conquer me. So things haven't changed that much. There's still a mindset, either from kings, politicians, or even individually, in which I think I'm going to collect together all this stuff and I'm going to keep it. But from the Earth's perspective, even from the perspective of context of geological time, we're just passing through in a few moments. As I've mentioned before, around this time of year, I'm usually off to a retreat in India. And during the October season, I'm not going this year, by the way. During the October season, there are a kind of insect that's born in the late afternoon. It has its social life in the early evening. It gets timeshares, opens bank accounts, develops societies, parliamentary proceedings, and by the morning time, they're all dead. You'll see them congregating around a light bulb, and then in the morning, they're all dead. They have a lifespan of about 12 hours. And to me, that seems minuscule, but to Bhumi, the earth, watching me move through here and thinking, oh yeah, I'll just keep the whole thing, it's all mine, is ludicrous. So overcoming weakness of heart means discriminating and seeing what's the difference between that which is temporary and that which is permanent. And let's see the next slide. So if you have any reflections on these things or questions, just let me know. The next is taking initiative yourself. And these are called VLCs, or voluntary life changes. So turn knowledge, this kind of knowledge that we have, into action. So the yoga literatures teach, use your senses for bhajan and non-reward seeking activity. So bhajan means mantra meditation, hearing from wisdom literature, and so on. And non-reward seeking activity means do selfless service to our original conscious source. So it's very different, the kind of working with a higher cause and the mood of service. And so there are many different kinds of life changes you can make. I call them VLCs. And if you make a list of them, then you'll find that it's immediately energizing. In fact, if you come back to the screen for a second, I just mentioned an exercise that I highly recommend, and that is to make a list, sit down yourself and make a list of your priorities. I have mine written on this 8.5 by 11 sheet. And if you take the time to actually write down what your main priorities in life are, you'll surprise yourself. And the next day, that paper that you wrote on will be calling to you. If your mind starts lamenting, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not sure what to do, and getting into that kind of funk that the mind can get into when it's not guided properly, knowing what your main priorities are, it's very, very powerful. And when you write them down, commit them to paper, you'll find yourself guided by that. So that's one of the exercises in overcoming weakness of heart, and also voluntary life changes. On that priority sheet, you can write down, what habits do I want to change? And what do I want to develop? These are primary, you can develop primary areas of study. What are they? What are the main areas in your life where you want to improve? And as soon as you commit them to paper, then you start your VLCs, or your voluntary life changes. And the final category is upgrade the channel. Should say UTC. So when you upgrade the channel, it means that you use your Vivek, your discrimination, to choose your channels widely. And what do I mean by channels? It means what you choose to listen to. I mentioned earlier about how sound is the most subtle element, and it's creative. And whatever sound vibration I allow to penetrate my environment, and especially my inner environment, will begin to develop in calculated ways, or ways that anyone can calculate. So upgrading the channel. So as an example, we chanted mantra to begin with. If you introduce the higher sound of mantra, this is choosing your channel rather than letting someone choose for you. I'll give you an example that I found in a notebook when I was writing on a plane, and I noticed that every seat has a little TV screen on it, and then they give you a list of channels, and you say, here's the channels you can watch now. Help yourself. Or either that, or people have to pay for them. Those are really annoying because they keep showing the same ads over and over again. Pay for this, and then you can watch something. So what I observed about it is, number one, somebody programmed that, and they put in a particular set of channels for me to watch. And what was their motivation? Probably they wanted to fulfill their budget needs, which is not spend too much. And they didn't want to look cheap either and put completely, bad programming. So they chose something right in the middle. And there is a limited number of channels that you can watch. And it's already programmed, and that's what you get to choose from. And so there's a way in which the kinds of channels that we get when we come into this world are already programmed in. And unless we develop higher channels by bringing in a higher kind of sound vibration, we're stuck with the ones that are programmed in our mind. How are they programmed? Just by moving around the world and looking at stuff. And how can we understand that? Just by going on the internet. The other day, I was looking for a new chair, office chair. And so I looked at one, and the next thing I know, everywhere I went, anywhere on social media, there were offers. Hey, take this chair, take that chair. And I'm sure it will follow me for the rest of my life, maybe into the next life. They'll be say, hey, don't you still want a chair? And so our minds are very sensitive, and the environment's sensitive. And the most triggering of all the elements is the sound element. What quality of sound do we want? There's high sound and low sounds. So take in the best of sound. And so choosing your channel wisely and carefully, and deliberately taking in very spiritually rich content, you'll notice that it has a systemic effect on your whole body and mind. Now, since I've been on a monologue for quite some time, let's take a few reflections or questions. And if you want to speak up from the Zoom room, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts, comments, reactions, reflections, let us know.
So when you are given a lot of channels as options, how do you choose the right channel for you?
Through Vivek or discrimination. Because when you, first of all, find out, in general, channels means that we have to deliberately bring in the kind of sound and information that we know will elevate us and not degrade us. For instance, there's an abundance of information that comes in about the world in the form of various news channels. If you watch those all the time, that's kind of what you'll have on the tip of your brain. And it goes in deeply also. But if you then do a little research and you find out about the effect of, for instance, what is called Shastra or ancient wisdom literature, and you read that instead, you'll notice a reordering of your intelligence. You'll be more capable of understanding higher topics and seeing yourself and seeing the difference between yourself and your body. And if you practice mantra, that'll be effective too. So you can take guidance from those ancient wisdom literatures. They'll say, here are good channels, here are ones that are going to drag you down and make you feel disgusted.
Okay, thank you.
What else? Any other reflections or comments or questions to expand the conversation?
We have Raj on Zoom chat asking, every Atma is provided a field based on karma and certain number of toys to play with. What do these toys refer to?
Well, along with our, as Patanjali describes, along with our birth, which is one of the elements, we get what's called jati, bhog, which means a certain amount of enjoyment that's going to come to us, or facility for material happiness. A jati means a particular kind of birth, and ayu is the third item, which means a lifespan. So, for instance, a bird has a shorter lifespan than a kangaroo. Well, I don't know that for a fact. Some birds probably live to be 100. I think the Amazon gray parrot lives to be 100 or something like that. But let's say an ant and a horse, different ayu or lifespan, and that's what you get when you get a particular body, and it's already given a particular lifespan. And then the bhog means you get a certain amount of facility to try to enjoy the world. So toys come in the shape of what kind of senses you get. Some people's senses are stronger than others. Maybe your brain is more powerful. There are some people are born into more opulence than others. You get more facility materially and so forth. All these are not necessarily delimiting factors, because we can obviously choose to rise above them in various ways. But this is what we get as toys when we come into a particular body. What else, JM? Or anybody else?
Yeah, there is one more question on Facebook from Namrata. She's asking, on a day-to-day basis, to get out of a tamas state, is it better to transition into rajas first? Is it possible to go straight from tamas to sattva?
Yeah, like shifting on a stick shift car. Can you jump right up to fourth gear from second? Well, one point that Krishna makes in the Bhagavad Gita is that the modes are always mixing in this world. And yes, it's helpful to move from one to the next, because when you're in tamas, it's very difficult to do anything for yourself. So once you get to rajas, then you can start being a little self-determining. And hopefully there's some sattva mixed in, so that you have the wherewithal to do the right thing with your movement that you're making in the world. So yes, a little rajas. We need all these modes. In fact, to go to sleep at night, you have to have tamas, which is the mode that allows you to rest and be completely conscious of nothing. Not that you're unconscious, but you're conscious of nothing in deep sleep. So a tad of rajas to help move up to the sattva guna is okay, but it's actually noted in various wisdom literatures that if you go straight to transcendental knowledge, wisdom, and sound vibration, then very quickly you can purify the lower modes and transcend them. Sa gunan samatityaitan. So the modes are called gunas. And atita means you can rise above them. How? By bhakti yoga.
We have one more question. I don't know the name. The question is, what is your opinion on individuals utilizing psychedelics to encounter a spiritual epiphany?
To encounter a spiritual epiphany? I have a friend who's now an avid practicer of bhakti yoga who spent 7 years in the Amazon. And he's a writer. He wrote a book about a psychedelic a substance. I think it's called, correct me if I'm wrong, ayahuasca. It's some kind of a traditional psychedelic drug that's used by indigenous people there, and they use it as a tool to get higher awareness of their difference between their body and their self. And in his book and in talking to this intelligent person, he realized that there were a lot of plateaus from using the substance. And also there was a sense of non-accomplishment in that he was depending on something that was material to kind of open other doors. So it's not inherently a non-material substance, whereas the mantra is. And therefore, he felt that after experimenting for some time, there was a little bit of a letdown. He didn't get as far as he wanted to get. Although I have seen many people who have had a mind-altering experiences, either through psychedelics, and I saw a lot of it growing up in this, because I grew up in the 60s. I've seen it enough times that people change their personalities. In fact, the whole culture, counterculture arose when Owsley Stanley started producing LSD in mass quantity before it was illegal. And you can trace it as it made its way around the world. Music became, and album covers became more colorful. The counterculture was awakened and so forth. But there's a limit to that, because if you don't have a stable means in order to purify the mind, then it's inevitable that you'll be dragged back down again into the lower modes like Rajas and Tamas. And I saw that a lot, even in the Haight-Ashbury here in the Bay Area, where there was a lot of hopefulness about emancipation, spirituality, and so forth. And then there were an influx of a lot of drugs. There was a mixed result that substance abuse became a lot more prominent than self-realization and so forth. So
hey,
yes,
quick note on that.
Pardon me?
Quick note on that.
Yes.
I agree with 99% what you said. There's a book I've been reading called Sacred Knowledge. It's by William Richards. He studied psychedelics from the 60s on, where it lost its it fell from grace, I should say, from the abuse, and then it came back in like John Hopkins, I think, and some other studies. And while the impact of it, they've been using it for folks with terminal cancer. They've been using it for folks with alcoholism and different things, and with some efficacy, right? So if someone's really interested in looking at that as not necessarily a crutch to get you to the next level, but to understand things at a deeper, more maybe potentially realer level, who knows, right? It's an interesting a read called Sacred Knowledge.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that there are people who are studying it in a particular context to see ways in which to get out of very chronic mind cycles and so forth. And I mean, my father was a psychologist. He actually anyway, I won't go into the details. I'll just say that. And that he knew people that were doing research in that. And I've found it to be interesting, although he never went down that path. We talked a lot about it at that point. And it has been something that serious people who are looking at, mental health and stuff have experimented with and still are. And as you mentioned, Porter, sorry if I keep calling you Porter. I'm not sure what I should address you as, because it's hard from the labels here.
Oh, no, it's okay. James is the first name. That's
James?
Okay. Yes, James. The J is James. So,
okay, James. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
James
no problem.
mentioned.
No problem.
Still,
One other thing with the ayahuasca thing, which was interesting, is that some of the shamans in that indigenous culture that used that as a method to find medicine. I read of an account where a shaman, medicine man type of person used it to find the specific herb to treat an ailment, and details need not be, but the idea was that it actually put them into a space that all the life in the rainforest area became interactive. So it actually was able to guide him to what he needed, that he was after. So there's some interesting deeper pieces to this, that it's not about getting high, it's about the idea of getting connected to the oneness.
Yeah. And there's much of this described. This last thing I'll say, because I realize how far over time I am here for all of you, but that just in the Yoga Sutras also, there's a description of the actual technology, so to speak, of the mind, and how the mind's able to, for lack of a better term, and I hope this isn't too Star Trek-esque, but meld with the environment and understand inherent properties, for instance, in other people and plants. It comes up in the third section of the Yoga Sutra to describe the very nature of the world and how it's penetrable through our mind stuff, because that mind stuff is actually subtler than much of what's in the gross world. And the subtle can penetrate the gross and then observe it. You can't go the other way. The gross can't see the subtle. And through meditation and so forth, yogis actually are able to understand the subtleties of nature, properties in people and plants that otherwise might not be seen. So it's not such a far-fetched thing. And there are people who live on that level, like shamans, as James Prabhu is bringing up, that become very intuitive because they're dialed in on that level. And the purpose of bhakti really is to become very much aware of our connection with not just all life, but the source of all life, and actually to develop a relationship therein. And as I've mentioned before, our original conscious self is love personified. And when we do the mantra and the practice of bhakti yoga, then that relationship is formed day by day. And that is the way in which one becomes infused with all necessary strength to overcome weakness of heart, to develop the wherewithal to make voluntary life changes, and also to purify the consciousness. So we thank everyone for taking your valuable time to sit in on this extended chat as it is now. And I hope there's something that you're taking away from today that you'll find useful. And I'll be counting the days until I see you next time. Thank you, JM, for making everything work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And please
Thank you. Thank
the
you very much.
transcendental vibration going. See you soon.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank